Hi everybody! Today we're going to work with the same concept we explored last week, adding more color and character to our compositions. We have quite a few videos on how to draw and paint dogs, but in case you have missed any of them, let's begin with the basics. The first step is to simplify the shapes. All we really need to start is a circle and a few lines to mark where the main features will be. And from there, you add a few simple lines to guide the sketch. The process is very simple and intuitive, and it does not need to be more complicated than that. And before you know it, you already have the base for your composition. Of course, before painting, you can refine the sketch further if you wish. The longer you spend on it, the more detail you can add. But the most important thing is to understand that the foundation is very simple. Do it a few times and you will see how easy it can be to draw almost anything. And remember, you are an artist, and that means that you can and you should go beyond what a photograph or what a video can show. You can emphasize elements, you can exaggerate features, you can add personality to your composition, you can create your own version of the world around you. And the best way to build that confidence is by practicing. So let's make another one. And once again, we simplify the subject to its most basic shapes. And from there, we build up. From here, you may have noticed already that all we really need to do is establish a few base lines that indicate where the main features will be. From there, the drawing develops naturally. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. So let's make another one. And hopefully, if you would like to paint your own dog, this should give you a simple way to approach it. It's very straightforward, it's easy to follow, and I believe it's also fun, quite freeing, and even therapeutic. I personally like the raw and slightly naive quality they have here. And another one, and just another one, and just one more. Now we have our sketches, and you can already see that even at this very early stage, they start to look quite promising. So let's begin our first painting of the day. I have already refined my sketches and transferred them onto the paper. Once the sketch is on the paper, I begin with a simple underpainting, marking the edges with a base color. I usually like to start with burnt umber because it's a very versatile color. It blends harmoniously with almost any palette. And the technique here is quite simple. We mark the edges loosely, and as you can see, there is no great concern with precision. And of course, you cannot be completely careless, otherwise the painting may become messy, unless messy is exactly what you are looking for. But while the underpainting dries a bit, I begin marking where some of the flowers will appear. And look how easy it is to suggest the roses. I am not painting a rose in a realistic sense. I am painting the suggestion of a rose. And that suggestion is often enough. The idea is similar to what we explored last week. But this time, I wanted the paintings to be less grounded in realism and closer to our usual expressive approach. Each of these compositions took me about 30 to 40 minutes to complete, mostly because I didn't have a very precise plan for them. I only knew that I wanted to paint the dogs in the same approach that we did last week. So last week, we focused a bit on realism, or at least a simplified version of it. But today, we will return to a freer and more expressive approach, something that moves a little bit closer to our earlier exercises in the way that we represent our subjects. I am using acrylics on paper, but you can achieve the same effect with gouache and oils. And if you are working with acrylics or oils, you can also paint on canvas and you will obtain a very similar result. But once again, my focus is not that you paint like me. My goal is that you notice how paint is simple and that you can do it. And you can do it your own way. At this stage, I try not to cover the edges completely. They are meant to remain visible for now. Later, if you feel that the effect is too strong, it's too harsh, you can soften those edges with a dry brush. But in the beginning, it is often useful to leave them visible. These paintings were made late in the evening, and something that I only noticed in the following day was that a few of them had a small issue with contrast. For instance, in this one here, the dog wasn't standing out enough because the background was too dark. So I simply added a softer blue, and instantly the dog began to stand out much more clearly. One of the best things about this technique is that it adds character. The movement of the brush, the textures, the contrast between colors gives the painting a sense of energy. Okay, so this is essentially the technique that we will use for all 6 paintings. First, we transfer the sketch onto the paper or canvas. Then we mark the edges with a base color. And then we fill in the shapes with blocks of color. We blend where necessary. And finally, we add the other elements. Everything remains quite loose. We are not focusing too much on fine detail. What gives visual interest to the compositions is mainly the texture and how the colors talk to each other. The results are compositions that feel expressive and alive. I often mention here that something to keep in mind is to limit your color choices. Try to work with 4 to 6 colors at most. And if for whatever reason you need another tone, simply mix it from the colors that you already have. Even though these paintings look energetic, they still follow a simple structure, which is what prevents the work from becoming chaotic. And one of the best ways to get an organized, rather controlled composition, even when it is as busy as these ones we are working on today, is by building it up rather than bringing it all at once. We do it step by step, okay? And the first thing we need to establish is the shape. We need to define the shape before thinking about anything else. Because if the shape works well, the colors usually will work well. And often when we start doing everything all at once, it's hard to point out what it's not working. Is it the color? Is it the shape? But if you start solving one issue at a time, everything will work smoothly. So if the shape does not work, there is very little that the color or anything else can do to save it. So the most important thing in any work is the way you arrange the elements within the given space. This plays a crucial role in how the work communicates. Obviously, not every painting needs to be planned. Art is one of the few things in life that often works better when we allow ourselves to be guided by the process. However, it still helps to have a general idea of where we are going. Otherwise, we may not recognize the results when we find it. When we start using strong colors, like what we are doing here, it is very easy to get carried away. Everything begins competing with everything else. Suddenly, the painting feels confused. One simple guideline that can help is the 60-30-10 rule. The idea is very straightforward. Around 60% of the painting is your dominant color. This color sets the overall mood. Around 30% becomes a secondary or complementary color that supports the first one. And about 10% is accent color, a small but powerful element that will attract attention. You do not need to follow this rule strictly, but it is a simple guideline that helps us stay in control. And another useful habit I have is repeating colors across the compositions. For instance, if I add a small touch of yellow in the eye and nowhere else, that color will feel disconnected. So what I usually do is repeat small touches of that color in other areas of the painting, very subtly, even in places where it is not required. Those small repetitions help anchor the color within the composition and create harmony. You will notice that even though the colors in these dog portraits are bold, the palette remains rather limited. That restriction also helps the paintings feel cohesive as a group. This idea of building things gradually also connects to something larger than painting. Most solid things in life are built from the ground up, whether it is a skill, a relationship, a career, or even something as simple as starting the day well. Things tend to work better when they are built step by step. When we rush straight to the results without proper attention to the foundations, things often collapse. And when it happens, we feel frustrated, even though the real issue was simply the structure. You cannot build anything from the whole. We start with little pieces. The structure has to rise from the base. It's cliche, but it is true. And painting works exactly the same way. If we begin with too many details too early, the painting becomes unstable. Instead, we begin with large shapes, then medium shapes, and finally the smaller details. We build the painting layer by layer. The process may be slower, but certainly it is stronger. Many people, especially when they are starting, find drawing difficult because they want to begin immediately with the perfect drawing, the perfect eye, the perfect proportions. And of course, there are many very talented artists who can do that. But if you are still learning, the most reliable method is simply to begin with very basic lines, then you add structure, then you add details. Later, you can introduce light, shadow, volume, backgrounds, anything else. We live in a time and age when everything is urgent. Everything has got to be done now. We want everything and we want it now. We want fast results. We want fast improvement. We want fast answers, fast recognitions, fast replies. We want fast, fast, fast. Everything has got to be quick, 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 quick. Everything is urgent. Everything is in a rush. Everything is already late. And everything is tiring. But that urgency can only prevent us from appreciating the process itself. Real progress usually comes from small improvements repeated over time. Tiny steps that eventually accumulate into something meaningful. Art demonstrates this very clearly. When you paint building the image layer by layer, piece by piece, you begin to appreciate the process itself. And the work becomes less about the final result and more about the act of creating. So painting works in a very similar way. If we rush straight to the result, we skip the most interesting parts, the exploration, the decisions, the adjustments, the moments when the painting changes direction. Those moments are often where creativity lives. Sometimes you may see a painting that is technically complete but feels empty. And often that happens because the only goal was to finish it. So it was finished, but it is lifeless. So, whenever you are doing something, whether creative or anything, try to give yourself time to experience the process. Otherwise, life becomes simply a sequence of completed tasks. It's like every day is the repetition of the same day without much truly lived. Experiences, skills, relationships, personal goals, they rarely appear fully formed. They arrive gradually and they grow gradually. Feeling that something is missing, try to slow down and respect the rhythm of things. And notice how it all becomes stronger and more meaningful simply because it was built carefully rather than all at once. One reason children tend to enjoy art so much more is that they use far more imagination than we do as adults. As we grow older, we begin thinking more about control. We want everything to be exact. If something does not clearly resemble what we have in mind, we start to doubt that it can represent what we have in mind. That is one of the sad things that happens when we grow up. We forget that things can be simpler, more imaginative, more free. And these are the results of what we have done today. I hope you have learned something new today and that you now have a clearer understanding of how to build up your compositions. And whenever you are starting a new piece, do not think of it as a finished piece. Think of it as something that needs to be structured, and the final result will begin to make more sense. As always, keep on practicing and thank you for joining us.